Imagine standing on a beach. You're just watching two people react to the ocean.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, so the first person is meticulously building a sandcastle. They're calculating the exact distance from the tide, looking for that perfect mathematical balance.
Like where the sand is just wet enough to hold its shape.
Exactly, but not so wet that the whole structure washes away, you know?
Yeah.
But then the second person isn't looking at the sand at all.
What are they doing?
They are holding a surfboard, staring at the horizon, and just waiting to sprint headfirst into a hurricane.
That is a perfect setup. I mean, that tension right there between engineering stability and just aggressively chasing momentum, that is the fundamental framework for the data we are parsing today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Our mission for today is unpacking a genuinely fascinating week of research data logs from Team AI Lab.
A really wild week, honestly.
Really, we're looking at the week from Monday, May 25th through Friday, May 29th, 2026. And we are not just going to, analyze a dry spreadsheet here.
No, definitely not.
We are following a narrative, a story of adaptation. It's a real-time observation of two algorithmic models battling it out in a wildly dynamic market environment.
Right, our sandcastle builders and our surfers.
Yes. So we have Team Mountain Climbers running on what they call equilibrium detection logic, the sandcastle builders. And then we have Team Wave Riders running on surging force tracking our surfers.
And spoiler alert, over these 5 days, one model really struggled to find its baseline, while the other one just, it caught a massive surge that completely altered its season standing.
It doubled its points in 5 days. But before we actually map out the daily logs and get into the drama, let's establish the parameters for you, the listener.
Yes, the crucial disclaimer. We have to be very clear here. What we are doing in this deep dive is strictly an exercise in sharing research data logs.
Just observing algorithmic behavior in the wild, basically.
Exactly. This analysis is completely nonprofit and purely non-advisory. We are driven entirely by intellectual curiosity today.
So, absolutely no trading recommendations here.
None whatsoever. Observing how these models adapted to past environments provides zero guarantee of future results. I mean, none.
Right.
Any final investment decisions you make in your own portfolio are always your responsibility. We're just here to look at the science of algorithmic adaptation.
Examining the math behind survival, which is fascinating enough on its own. So, to understand the battle lines of this specific week, we first really need to look at the daily scouting logs.
The 9.0 AM new talent draft.
Right, the JST 9.00 AM draft.
Yeah.
Every morning, these algorithms run a scan. And just to be totally clear on the mechanics for everyone, when we say the algorithm scouts a unit, we are talking about an individual stock within the Japanese equities market.
Correct. The algorithms scan the entire market, pick specific equities, and lock them into a rigid 10-session holding and tracking roster.
Just to test their logic against the real world.
Right. And the contrast in those early drafts, it sets the tone for the entire week.
It really does. So on Monday, May 25th, the Mountain Climbers came out highly active. They pulled 4 new units into their roster.
A very aggressive start.
Yeah. But the Wave Riders, on the other hand, they scouted only 1.
Which tells us a lot about what the mountain climbers were calculating that morning.
Mhm.
Because, equilibrium detection is fundamentally a mean reversion strategy.
Right, so mathematically, the model is scanning for standard deviation anomalies.
Exactly. It's looking for units, individual stocks, whose price action has stretched so far outside their historical statistical bands that the algorithm says, hey, there is a high probability of a snapback to the baseline.
Like a rubber band stretched to its absolute limit. On Monday morning, it saw a market full of these stretched rubber bands and thought, okay, balance is waiting to be restored. Let's buy in.
It saw a ton of opportunity, but the algorithmic environment is mercilessly fluid, as we always say.
Oh, totally. Because by Wednesday, the mountain climbers' scouting activity completely flatlined.
Went to zero.
Literally 0. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, they drafted 0 units. The algorithm essentially evaluated the environment and just halted all new capital deployment.
And simultaneously, the Wave Riders did the exact opposite. They aggressively accelerated.
Yeah, on Thursday alone, their surging force tracking logic drafted 4 new units. It was a complete inversion in behavior.
It really was. And I think it's important to point out that the mountain climbers didn't break.
Right.
It's just that their parameters were exceeded.
Yeah.
If the market's directional momentum pushes so hard that those standard deviation bands just break entirely, the algorithm recognizes that the historical baseline no longer exists.
The rubber band didn't stretch, it snapped.
Exactly. The environment invalidated the mean reversion hypothesis entirely.
Yeah.
So the algorithm did exactly what it was supposed to do. It optimized for preservation by benching itself.
It's like a sports manager, you know. They set this aggressive game plan on Monday, and then by Wednesday they look outside, realize the weather conditions are completely wrong for their strategy, and just decide to bench all their new players.
That's a great way to put it. And conversely, the wave riders are engineered for the exact environment that sidelined the climbers.
Right, because surging force tracking ignores historical baselines completely.
It doesn't care about mean reversion. It scans for velocity. When a unit breaks resistance with a massive, sustained influx of volume, the model registers that directional breakout and just rides it.
When equilibrium shatters, the surging force takes over.
Precisely.
But, you know, that shift in drafting behavior is really just the setup. To evaluate the actual efficacy of these models, we have to track the units they had already deployed into the field.
Right, the ones that were already locked into those 10-session rosters.
Which brings us to kind of the core theme of the week, adaptation versus attrition. Looking at the active roster performance tracking by Friday, May 29th, we really see the survivors of the week.
And the survival metrics are pretty stark.
Extremely stark. Team Wave Riders ended the week with 10 active rosters, and 9 of those units were holding positive points.
I mean, 9 out of 10. That is a near-perfect translation of environmental logic into tangible performance.
It's incredible. And then Team Mountain Climbers finished with 8 active rosters, but only 6 were holding positive points.
Which is still okay. But the true divergence in their mathematical fitness really shows up when you look at the 10-session exits.
Oh, the exits. Let's talk about those. Because when a unit completes its 10-session holding protocol, the algorithm closes the position and the final score is logged.
Right. And Tuesday, May 26th, that was the big one for the Wave Riders.
Yeah. On Friday, their equilibrium model finalized a 10-session exit in the information and communications sector. And the logged result was exactly 0.0 points.
0. Just dead 0.
0, plus or minus nothing.
And a 0.0 exit after 10 full sessions of tracking is just a textbook example of algorithmic attrition.
Right, because it's not neutral, really.
No, not at all. The unit was subjected to market friction, to volatility, to time decay. It expended computational resources and tied up roster space for 2 full weeks, basically, only to end up perfectly stagnant.
Because the mean reversion it anticipated was just completely overwhelmed by the broader market inertia.
Exactly.
It's the equivalent of spending 10 days hiking through an intense blizzard, right? You're constantly recalibrating your compass, fighting the elements, using up all your supplies, and then the weather clears, you look down at your GPS and realize you just walked in a massive circle.
You're right back where you started.
Yeah, you didn't lose your pack, but you didn't conquer the mountain either. And in a dynamic tracking environment, holding stagnant units carries a massive opportunity cost.
It does. You are dedicating finite capital to a thesis that the environment simply refuses to validate. And while the climbers were locked into that 0.0 holding pattern, the Wave Riders were using that same time to extract 74.1 points.
But you know, the data logs reveal a massive complication here.
Oh, this is the really wild part.
Yeah, because based on those huge daily exits, you would assume the Wave Riders just completely dominated the broader market, right?
I think so.
But when we look at the index contrast metrics, like how these individual unit portfolios actually performed against the sheer gravity of the Nikkei 225 and 2PX indices, the narrative gets incredibly complex.
Because the index contrast is the ultimate macro-environmental reality check.
Right. So for Team Mountain Climbers, the week was just a steady decline against the indices. On Monday, they were down 7.4 points against the Nikkei. By Friday, that gap had actually worsened to negative 9.7 points.
Which, makes sense given their struggles. But the crazy thing is, the Wave Riders experienced almost the exact same friction.
Yes. Despite logging a 74.1 point positive exit on Tuesday, their negative contrast against the Nikkei actually widened over the week.
It's counterintuitive.
Totally. They started Monday down 7.8 against the index, and they ended Friday at negative 8.8. So I have to ask you, as the expert mathematically, these two data sets seem to contradict each other.
Right. I know exactly what you mean.
The Wave Riders are clearly functioning perfectly. They logged 74.1 points on Tuesday, and the logs show another huge daily score of positive 56.6 points on Friday.
In foods and land transportation. Yeah.
Right. So their internal logic is successfully extracting huge value from the market. How can a model perform its designated function that flawlessly, pulling in massive daily yields, and still lose ground to the Nikkei?
Great question, and it really reviews the mechanics of index gravity. The data presents a vital postmortem observation here.
Okay.
This widening negative contrast across both models that are vastly different, indicates that the macro environment was operating on a completely separate frequency from individual unit logic.
So it wasn't just peacetime in the markets.
Not at all. We were observing a historical turning point where the sheer scale of the indices basically disconnected from the underlying individual equities.
So the index was just moving on its own fuel.
Exactly. The wave riders successfully identified surging forces within specific pockets, foods, electric appliances, and they extracted the maximum possible points from those units. But the broader index is a massive aggregated mechanism.
Right.
When institutional capital floods the top-weighted components of the Nikkei, or when macroeconomic forces like currency fluctuations lift the index mechanically, it creates an upward velocity that a targeted, nimble algorithm simply cannot match.
Wow, so it's like the surfer is riding a massive wave perfectly, pulling off every trick, but the entire ocean level is rising faster than the wave itself.
That is the exact friction we are observing. The algorithm is optimizing perfectly for its selected environment, but the macro environment, the index, is operating on a sheer scale of capital that just overrides individual unit performance.
That is wild. And that friction really brings us to the macro outcome of the week. Like, how did this specific environment reshape the overall battle for the season?
Because the season standings, as of Friday, May 29th, show a complete structural reorganization.
Oh, completely. Let's look at the numbers. The Wave Riders entered this week carrying a heavy deficit balance of negative 29.1 points.
They were really in the hole.
Deep in the hole. But because their surging force logic successfully aligned with the breakout momentum in those localized sectors, capping off the week with that Friday exit yielding 56.6 points, they didn't just recover.
No, they absolutely erased that deficit.
They ended the week sitting at a massive positive 102.5 total season points.
Incredible turnaround.
And the mountain climbers experienced the inverse trajectory. They began the week with a structural advantage, right? They were carrying over a positive balance of 14.3 points.
They were comfortable.
Very comfortable. Yet, because the environment invalidated their equilibrium logic, forcing them to halt their drafting and basically endure the friction of stagnant 0.0 exits, they ended the week at only positive 50.9 total season points.
The Wave Riders didn't just catch up to them, they eclipsed them entirely.
Doubled their score, basically.
Right. But, when we evaluate this data through the lens of Team AI Lab's core research philosophy, we don't look at this and say the mountain climbers failed.
We don't.
No. We view this entire week as a watershed moment for the season. A week characterized by such heavy attrition against the broader indices is viewed as an essential evolutionary stepping stone.
Okay, kind of like evolutionary biology.
Exactly. The environment acts as a harsh filtration system.
The harsh winter, basically.
Right. The massive index gravity we observed this week was brutal, but the logic parameters that allowed the Wave Riders to survive and extract positive exits, despite that gravity, those parameters become foundational data logs.
I see. So the traits that survive the harshest conditions are passed on to the next generation of algorithms.
Exactly. They are precisely the data points needed to calibrate the models for the following week. It is the survival of the most mathematically fit logic for that highly specific moment in time.
So the mountain climbers benching themselves was actually a success, in a way.
It was. Their algorithms correctly identified that preservation of capital was the optimal mathematical response to an environment devoid of mean reversion. They didn't blow their accounts trying to force a strategy that wasn't working.
That makes total sense. We really tracked a remarkable evolution from Monday to Friday here.
A total shift.
Yeah, we started with the mountain climbers enthusiastically deploying capital, assuming standard deviation would hold, and we ended with the Wave Riders entirely rewriting the season standings by successfully tracking massive, localized velocity.
It's a brilliant illustration of how rapidly market terrain shifts.
And how completely unsentimental an algorithm must be to survive it.
Unsentimental is the perfect word. And as we conclude this deep dive, it really is critical to reiterate our position as analysts of this data. We are sharing historical research logs to respect your intellectual curiosity regarding complex algorithmic behavior. This entire discussion has been an observation of specific parameters reacting to a specific historical window.
We are mapping the structural integrity of these models, not building a blueprint for your personal portfolio.
Exactly. The profound disconnect we observe today between individual unit success and that massive index gravity, it's the ultimate proof of how complex and unpredictable these environments remain.
You never know what the ocean's going to do next.
Right. So the burden of navigating live markets and making final investment decisions rests solely and entirely with you, the listener.
Well said. And as you process the sheer scale of the WaveWriters turnaround this week, surfing that incredible momentum to 102.5 points while the mountain climbers just halted their operations entirely, it leaves us with one lingering structural question.
Oh, what's that?
Well, the surging force logic completely dominated this specific environment, right?
Totally.
But momentum is finite.
Always.
So when this massive index-defying wave finally exhausts its energy and the market inevitably snaps back, which algorithm's logic will be the first to detect that silent shift?
That's the real question.
Right. Will the surfer recognize the turning tide before they wipe out entirely? Or will the sandcastle builder be the first to realize the waters have finally calmed?
We'll just have to wait for the next batch of logs to find out.
Something for you to analyze as you navigate your own data streams. Until next time, keep diving deep.